Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Free, a podcast for collective liberation.
Feeling the momentum of other people realizing that our liberation is interconnected, that our joy is interconnected, that this is not about being saviors or even allies. This is like what we are all working towards for our mutual liberation.
It's really false notion that the state can provide safety at the helm of other people's lives, as if safety could ever come from harming other people.
For us to be free, everyone must be free.
I'm playing different role and Hannah's playing different role. Deema is playing different role. That it's all contributing into the better world that we wish to see for our children and the future generations.
Welcome. I'm your co-host, Hannah, and I'm your other co-host, Deema. And today we're going to be talking about a very happy and exciting topic, cancel culture. We both read some of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, We Will Not Cancel Us, which is about cancel culture. And this is also a topic that has come up for us quite a bit as we have just kind of met and processed through things that are going on in the movement, things that are going on in our communities, things that are going on online. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic for sure.
Yeah, I am as well. I feel like to be working in any kind of liberation movement, this just comes up. Actually, any movement that's happening right now, we're seeing divisiveness, and I think cancel culture plays a big role in that, and it makes movements become unhealthy. So I'm glad that we've felt that. And so we've wanted to make sure that as we work on collective liberation and we build out community and spaces and conversations, that is something that we're always reflecting on and making sure that we're not creating a space that ends up being harmful for those that are involved in it.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting. Before I read We Will Not Cancel Us, which I read that like a year and a half ago, and then I was just kind of looking over my notes and some of my insights from that. I felt like it was mostly the right that was talking about cancel culture in a negative way.
Yeah,
and so
like
it's
the anti-woke kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's really a thing that this is kind of also on theme with a topic that we talked about with Doppelganger and Naomi Klein, of if we're not addressing these things within our community, they will be used as weapons against our community, and they will harm our community from the inside. And so this isn't a conversation that will ever happen once. It's going to be an ongoing one, but yeah, it's a real one. So it's nice to feel like Adrienne Marie Brown's approach for me felt very loving and not escaping accountability. I think a lot of the right's perspective on cancel culture is like trying to not, cancel culture kind of arose from a reaction against a lack of accountability, I feel, where people would get away with really horrific things and really terrible things and harm to the community. And then those things would be kind of slid under the rug. And so as a reaction to that, we really went, maybe a little bit overboard in being very punitive with members of the community when people mess up, and not creating paths to redemption. And so where the right's kind of critique of cancel culture is a lot of, oh, we don't need that sort of level of accountability. You guys are being too purist, maybe. Adrienne Marie Brown's perspective is really about like, how do we create compassionate ways to grow from people's mistakes, and how do we, So what are your kind of initial thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. You introduced me to the book, We Will Not Cancel Us, so I have it here in my hand. I felt similarly to you. What I really like about Adrienne Marie Brown's perspective is it's not saying like you don't need to be accountable and then we don't need to call things out, but it's saying how do we do that in a way where we can continue to be working together. And I actually really liked this one description, so I'm going to just read it. She gave a description of sort of like if you're holding a vision of a movement that could be healthy, still have accountability, but be healthy and not sort of like attack within. She wrote, holding this vision inside of movements right now has meant feeling not just for what is punitive, but for where there is gleeful othering, revenge, or punishment of others, particularly when these things deepen our belonging to each other, usually briefly, until we too fuck up. And I just thought that was so powerful, because it is like, it reminds me of Audre Lorde's quote about the master's tools. It's like almost within movements, we're starting to use the same tools of like harm and like gleeful othering, and that sort of violence against one another within each movement is so distracting. It is so counterproductive to the movement. It makes sense that like we've like grown and we've grown up in these sort of like violent ways of being, and so that's like part of how collective movements have they fall into the same traps.
Yep.
And she describes it really well. So yeah, I thought the gleeful othering was, because I do think that people take some joy in sort of cutting people down, and that's what's been happening. And it's breaking down movements that are actually meant to be very good, but fall into that trap.
Yep. That's when we start to mimic the very systems we're hoping to dismantle. Exactly how you said, the master's house with the master's tools. It's not liberatory. For some people, it's emotional reaction. For some people, it's a desire for safety. For some people, it's a desire to gain status, because I think when there's this sort of gleeful attacking, it's an easy way to sort of get some clout. And then, in some ways, it's understandable in a world where justice feels very scarce, to try to take justice into our own hands and take people down in our community, because it's easier to point out the wrongs in our own spaces, because it's easier to change versus, and like all this anger that we have, all of this recognition of the injustice that's going on, it's easy to take that out on each other, because the change that's going to happen outside of the movement, the change that's going to happen in these systems as we dismantle and we create something better, is slow. And sometimes it feels like we take 10 steps backwards. So the temptation to cancel, the temptation to like call out rather than call in, makes a lot of sense, in addition to being so harmful.
So harmful. That's such a great point. I didn't actually think of it in that context, that movements often, gain momentum and gain energy by like having wins, right? And when you can't feel that win because you're dealing with something so monumental, you might feel pleasure from sort of like feeling like you got some justice with someone within the movement who said something wrong. But in the long term, that doesn't actually help the movement. And so you need other ways to feel wins than taking people down within your own movement. And it's easy to sort of look at movements and say this from the outside. But you and I have both been in situations where we have seen this sort of devolving, and it's so sad. And I just hope for more people to read this book, We Will Not Cancel Us, and also just see this as like almost a blueprint or a way to sort of safeguard against that, and try to recognize what's happening, that this isn't actually going to help. This might make you feel better in the moment, but won't help with the overall goal.
It's also a challenge. The book is a challenge of not only how we're approaching people in our own community, but like our view of justice in general. And I think that when we believe like wholeheartedly, and this is almost a spiritual thing for me, in the potential for redemption in just about everyone. And that is how I feel, even if I don't always like speak in alignment with that. And that's how I feel like here, even though sometimes things happen and I don't always want to advocate for that feeling of that everyone should and can have a path to redemption. That view of justice really is, in my mind, the foundation of a liberatory and healthy society, and like a healthy and connected community. And I feel that in the past, year and a half, I've seen a lot of people struggle with that. And it's a very understandable struggle of like, not just how do we view justice within our own community, but how do we view justice in the world? And is this something that that we really like believe in. And a lot of the abolitionists hold to that, right? And I believe Adrienne Marie Brown is an abolitionist. Yes, she is.
Yes, she is.
Because her view of justice is transformative justice. And that is a whole nother kind of conversation to have, and an important conversation to have, of what does transformative justice look like. But yeah, the issue of cancel culture is like, there's the surface of how this is hurting the movement and how it's impractical. And then the deeper piece of like how this view of justice, I think, is hurting our own like souls and spirits and humanity in a way.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I hadn't really thought about redemptive justice and sort of believing that everyone has a way to redeem themselves, or that being kind of at the core a little bit when you think about cancel culture and sort of taking people down and then not allowing them back in, versus, being saying that, being accountable and asking for accountability, but also allowing people to learn. That's the thing. Like, cancel culture doesn't let people learn.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
or
we're always
apologize.
learning.
Yeah. And sometimes and I want to be like, there's so many different things that people can get canceled for, and there's going to be different paths for what that can look like with restoration and redemption. In that, there's making things right with people that you have victimized, which is a really important thing. And there's times that's like being deplatformed because you've engaged in harm and need to like figure some of that out is a healthy process.
It is that makes sense.
And it's just not forever. And all of these things, it's like, from my view of justice, is still kind of the restorative model, which is very victim-centered, or the person who is harmed-centered, and having their voice kind of dictate when that person can maybe regain some of the influence. And I think this is an all very like complicated and ongoing conversation. But yeah, that what is the path back? And sometimes when people apologize, when they take accountability, it's like, oh, so you did do that. And then they're fully rejected. It's such an interesting, like, people. So then people get defensive, and then there's no resolution for whatever happened. And that's, it's hard. It's hard because people feel like they then have to double down, and that's not helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're both saying like, we're not saying that questioning what people are doing and saying that something that someone has said is wrong. Like that, no, we should be doing that. We should definitely be doing that. It's about what happens after that, right? Yep. And that's the part that I think Adrienne Marie Brown does a great job of describing, like how to do that. But one thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was really interesting, it does show up in her writing, but I've thought about this a lot, is that to me, I think part of the problem we're facing right now is that everything is so quick. Like the speed of things is a problem. Speed doesn't really allow for nuance. It doesn't allow for explanation. People want to immediately make a decision on people and move on.
Yep.
And I think that's where we're in such a struggle, because the information we get is changing constantly. So you see a headline, you move on. That person's bad. This person's good. That's not life. Like, things are much more nuanced than that, and we don't allow for it.
Yep. I think that and what you just described, that person's bad, this person's good, it's a very easy place to go when there are such dangerous people and policies right now. And so you want to, like, your brain wants to quickly identify, are you a friend or a foe? Like, are you going to harm me or are you not going to harm me? And so that, A, it's very damaging. B, with how quick things are coming out, people have to make these decisions or feel like they have to make those decisions or calls of the moral goodness of another person quickly. And I think some of this comes back to the unregulated state that a lot of us are in, because I fall into that all the time. Like when I'm not taking care of myself, and I'm not saying that we should find a way to be regulated. Like, we're living in a really messed up time, and I know that regulation can feel like a privilege.
Yeah.
And when I'm not taking care of myself, I totally feel like it's so easy for me to write somebody off because of what somebody's interaction with them was, or because of one thing that they said. And And I want to say, you know, if you're not completely on board with X, then I don't want to work with you, you know, or I don't want to engage with the content that you're putting out, or I don't want to read your articles or whatever that looks like. It's very easy for me to get into all or nothing thinking when I feel like that level of stress. So it's like, also it's both of this, it's holding both things. It's like, it's really understandable that we feel the need to do this, and it's not doing us any favors. And I remember, you know, a few months back, really leading up to the election, it was such a hard time for the movement. And I know both of us were struggling. I burned out, and I burned out in part because I felt like we really weren't talking to each other in a compassionate, not you and I, but just the movement in general, like talking to each other in a compassionate and community-oriented way. It was, you're either in or you're out, or you're in this category or in that category. And this was across the board on the left. It was really painful.
It was brutal.
Really painful to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, you were seeing it more, I was seeing it more in like personal interactions with people, and you were seeing it sort of like in like factions of movements, like, and it was really hard to see people that had the same goals, really at the end of the day, just like taking each other out, you know. It was really hard to watch. I wish I had really known more about this book, because I think it really helps you realize it's not, because I want to be clear. I don't think we want to not call people out. Like, I don't think that that's the answer. Like, I think that and I also have the same thing, where there are moments where I just feel like I can't be, not so much in community, but I can't go out and agree with or be soft with something that just feels really wrong to me. But there's a way, and that's what I like about Adrienne Maree Brown's approach, is there is a way to do both. Like, it doesn't, again, that's part of the problem, is we fall into these binaries, like, it has to be this or that. Like, even with like cancel culture, you can do the like calling for accountability. You can do that, but you can also get to a place where that advances the movement versus shuts it down, because of how you do it, how you ask for accountability, how you ask for someone to rethink what they've said. I'm going to actually read one thing that is in her book, and it's basically the definition of principled struggle, which I really love that term, and I think that's the term that could be used really to try to understand how do we hold people accountable, but still keep things moving forward where everyone can continue to do the work. So it's, in a nutshell, principled struggle is when we are struggling for the sake of something larger than ourselves and are honest and direct with each other while holding compassion. It's like being able to hold those two things, saying like, this is wrong, but let's talk through it. And then, you know, apology comes into it as well. You know, I think apology is so important. You know, and you've mentioned apology can end up doing harm for people, but at the same time, I think it's a critical part.
It is. It has to be. And that's the ownership, the accountability, the self-accountability, the ability to be like, own up to, hey, I fucked up, or I spoke over someone and I shouldn't have, or, you know, this phrase I said in a moment that was heated and that I felt really angry, but it's not really how I feel about people who vote a certain way, or whatever that looks like. Saying all of those things, I think is critical, and creating the space to like encourage that, especially from young people as well, I think is really important. We were over here where, you know, people in workplaces would get away with sexual harassment, and people in movements would be emotionally abusive, and all of this. And then we pendulumed over to like over accountability, which is like a natural part of this. And then this is coming back to like being able to speak up and say, hey, that was not cool. This is not the way to lead. Or, you know, hey, this is really harmful and offensive to this group, and I need you to know that. Or the way you're going about change making, again, we'll take it back to the election, by voting for X or by voting for X or whatever, like makes me feel like you don't actually care about me. And sometimes we intellectualize in cancel culture where we really just want to, like, where maybe it's healthier for community to say, to start at it from an emotional place of like, I don't feel like you give a shit about us right now. And that really sucks. Rather than here's the ideology and here's what you're doing and here's what happens when you follow the logic to the end. Like, we're working towards the same ends. And so it's like for you and I, if you said something that I felt hurt me and I approached it in an intellectual way, or to try to debate you or take you down, like, that doesn't help the work that we're doing together or where we're going together. Principled struggle. It's like keeping, if we can continue to say, this is where we're going, like, this is the vision, this is the better future, and we agree on that better future, and we can continue to build trust.
Yes.
And I think that's a big piece too. It's like, we're all fractured, we're all in front of our phones, we're all in front of our computers. So like trusting that someone has the best intentions has become really hard.
Yeah. And trusting also that that you saying something wrong is going to be okay. Like, it's not, I think that is one of the biggest parts I'm so worried about, is that I see people being silent, or in moments when like it is so important for people to use their voice and they are not, because what they have seen over the last several years is that if they say something even minutely wrong, it's over. Like no one's, they're going to get shot down. And people, it's actually, I think people are so in fear of saying what they believe because they might not say it exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's the part I feel like that we need more examples of this principled struggle playing out in media, in our, in what we're reading, so that people can see that there is going to be a soft landing, like even if you make a mistake. Because we're all constantly making mistakes. If I were to look at the things I've said throughout my life and like have it all documented, I have made so many mistakes. But we're now in a place where so much is documented and so much is out there, and the speed of things that people are afraid. They don't want to be swept up in a moment where they're just shut down.
Yeah, we need to see transformative conflict in action and redemption in action. And again, like, I just want to reiterate, because you've already said this a couple of times, but like, we're not asking to turn a blind eye. We're not even asking to be soft. It's not a matter of like, oh, I need to make sure if I confront you that I'm like coddling your emotions. No, like sometimes people have to be called out, and it's really healthy to be called in a way that might feel a bit abrasive, but it's nobody's responsibility to try to be like overly soft or a bit codependent about people's emotions. And so I just want to like iterate that based on what we've been talking about. But yeah, I think seeing transformative conflict in action, seeing redemption in action is important, because I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, I want to be doing what you're doing, and I'm just afraid I'm going to get canceled. And I've had people message me, especially in the beginning, they're like, you seem great, I hope you don't get canceled. And it's such a interesting thing. And then, there's so many things, oh my God, that I have said that I do not agree with. There are so many, like,
we're all learning and we're all like evolving.
Like, just to think that I grew up evangelical, just to think about, and I don't talk about my sexuality much, but I'm bi. Just to think about the levels of homophobia that I had in my teens, and like that alone would be super cancelable, like super cancelable. And then 19, 20, maybe 19, becoming engaged with the Black Lives Matter movement, I had not really processed some of that racism subtly, some of the microaggressions or the things that are just like passed down, that are put inside of language that are so subtle. And I hadn't dismantled that inside of myself. And then with Palestine, all of the Western supremacy that I didn't realize that I was still existing within, so much necessity for dismantling in there. So it's like, there's things I said a year ago I don't agree with. There's a lot of things I said 10 years ago that I don't agree with. There's things I said 15 years ago that would get me certainly canceled. And that's growth. Like, that's part of, we are developed into systems of domination, of white and Western supremacy. And it takes, and we have to dismantle that within ourselves. And that requires like intention. And it doesn't mean that we have to be like, oh, it's okay, she's on her journey and she said racist things. No, absolutely not. Like, still, accountability. I know we stress this a lot because it's the balance there.
Yeah.
And it takes time, and having grace for people, having some level of grace or understanding or path to redemption when people mess up, it's going to be the thing that keeps this movement going forward, I believe. And I do, like, culturally, usually we do come to a state of balance. I just feel like we can't waste a lot of time finding that balance, because we need everybody in this movement, and we need these people with all of these diverse perspectives to be speaking up, to be making videos, to be writing. And if those people are too afraid that they're going to slip up and say one wrong thing, the loss of cancel culture isn't just this creator or this writer or this person or whatever. It's the 90% that are like, this looks too fucking stressful.
Yeah.
I'm swearing a lot in this episode. I'm going to have to classify that. It's not clean.
You're not going to get canceled for it. No, I think this is the thing that I worry about so much about is, and I think we have seen it in the last year, over a year, just with collective liberation movement, especially with the topic of Palestine. I have had conversations with so many people who, and one of the big issues we have is apathy. So there's that big group of people that just don't seem to care. And I don't know how, it's hard to get to those people. And we should one time discuss that. Like, how do we deal with apathy? But separate from people who are apathetic, there is a large group of people that do care a lot. They care a lot. And I've had these really amazing conversations with people who on the surface don't seem to care, don't say anything. And then I have a deeper conversation with them. And like you said, they are silencing themselves out of fear that if they say something wrong, and I think it's a fear of, this is the other thing. I think there's a and this is something I definitely struggled with, a fear of being, of conflict, a fear of having to respond to someone challenging you. Yeah. Versus being like, I wish more people could understand that if someone challenges you, that can be a good thing. Yep. That can be your moment to really grow. And we instead, I think culturally, we think if we're challenged, that's a moment where we need to kind of like fight back versus thinking, okay, actually, let me settle. Let me listen to what someone is telling me. And maybe this is a moment for me to grow, get better, evolve, and even become a better part of this movement. That's not how we have been taught, really. We've been really taught, like, if you are challenged, you need to like challenge back.
Yep. Oh, so what you just touched on, this is great. This is why I love that we go into this with like no notes and no structure, because what we've just arrived on is really important. And that's, we've talked about the not being punitive in our challenging, and sometimes because we're so shame-based, like the punitive, maybe it doesn't even start as punitive. Maybe it just starts as a challenge, and then there's defensiveness, and then it raises to punitive. And so this is where both kind of perspectives share a responsibility in transforming cancel culture. It's the people who are afraid to say sorry, or afraid to say, oh, that's totally right, I don't want to say that word. That word doesn't feel like it even resonates with me. Let's move on to a different word. But when we're challenged, we feel like we're a bad person. And so it's like, if I say something, say I use like maybe domination language, or, oh, here's a great example actually from my life. So I did a portrait interview series called Why We Fight, which I've talked about. And I exhibited at a film festival. And then at the film festival, they're like, hey, do you want to give a talk about the interviews or anything for filmmakers and artists and people who do interviews and things like that? I was like, that would be great. I would love to do this. And so I said, I think that I titled my teaching like how to get impossible interviews. Because I was like, I don't even know how I was able to talk to some of the people that I talked to.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot about building trust, and I've learned a lot about creating trauma-informed environments and things like that. But the title itself was a bit aggressive, right? Like how to get interviews. There was a woman after who came up and she says, and I say, she approached it so gracefully. She's like, I say this with love, like maybe don't say get interviews. I know this is the industry that we're in the film industry and in journalism, and like you got to get the interview. And it feels like it's objectifying a little bit the people that you're interviewing.
I see.
And I thought about that for like months. I shame spiraled because I felt like it reflected poorly on me as a person when I'm used to saying, hey, I'm looking to get this interview, because it's the simplest. And in some ways, it's the simplest thing to translate. Like,
yeah,
because people are used to how journalists speak. And I wasn't really being a journalist, but it was still kind of journalistic. And so I was just using the same language that I used in all these countries because I can't be like, I'm looking to have a conversation. It just wouldn't translate well. But she was completely right about that language. And in that context and in that environment, it would have been helpful to change it. And I still had so much shame and so much fear that I was like a bad person somewhere deep inside. And this is like, we can go into evangelical upbringing and a lot of different things. But I think a lot of us are raised in shame-based cultures. We have to work on transforming that if we're going to be confrontable. And we got to get rid of some of the saviorism, because the saviorism thing is like, I'm trying to prove that I'm a good person. I'm trying to prove that I can be a hero here. And then that makes you completely unconfrontable, because then you have to say, oh no, what if I'm a bad person? What if I'm not the hero? But if you're just a human trying to play their part in a movement, and you recognize that we're all flawed and we're all growing and we all change every single day, and there's no mistake that dictates the rest of your life, it's powerful. But what you touched on is that's shared responsibility. And I'm glad we got there, because becoming confrontable, learning to be confrontable is huge. I still struggle with it. I feel like I've done a lot of work, but
but it requires the other side to show that will be allowed.
Yes.
Right. So it requires both to do the work. Because if people don't see examples of people learning in public, that's the thing. We need more learning in public.
Yes. And this is where we started, and we were like, hey, if we say something that you all disagree with, please tell us. We want to learn. We aren't like fully developed. We aren't fully decolonized.
Yeah.
Learning in public allows for the disillusion of that shame and not attributing all of our words to our hearts,
Exactly. Oh, that's perfect. All of our words are not like words. They're amazing and they can do so much, but there's so much nuance and there's so much about a person that it's not helpful to just only take the words and then assume everything about that person.
Yeah,
which I think is what happens. And so we do need to create these spaces or these opportunities for people to see people be able to make mistakes and still be able to grow.
Yep.
And not just be shoved to the side,
And learning to interpret things generously. I think about this a lot in context of friendships and relationships. And sometimes when there's that breakdown of trust, you take one thing that they said and you interpret it as an attack, or you interpret it as ill-intentioned. And so this is community build. This is a necessity for community building, because if we don't have trust, then we can't interpret things generously. And if we can't interpret things generously, then there will be more tearing down, like starting with a love ethic, starting with compassion. And I think when people hear love and compassion, sometimes they feel like there's going to be softness and not justice.
Yep.
Those are not mutually exclusive things, justice and compassion and transformation, these all, I think, are very central to what we're trying to build.
I agree. And I think another key thing in all of this, and we talked a little bit about it, is slowing down.
Yeah.
Slow down before you react. Like, I think that's one of the key things. I have learned so much in my life is that, and we're just seeing so much speed and like immediate need to judge happening right now, that I think we would just gain so much from people just take a beat, you know?
Yep.
Slow down.
Yep. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels urgent. And the intention that we're putting into each word and each interaction, it matters. And it will determine the longevity of this movement. It'll determine the health of the movement. Practicing slowing down and approaching justice in a transformative and a restorative way allows us to start to embody the future that we want to bring in. Because like you said, we're mimicking the tools of the systems we're trying to dismantle. And that is going to impede our ability to see that future. Like if we can't practice the things that we want the systems to embody and enable, then we're going to be limited. And this is really something I hope, and I'm still learning this. This is,
we all are.
Yeah. But it's something I hope we can continue to work on and have elders too jump in sometimes. I think that would be helpful because I think a lot of these interactions are coming mostly from younger people and sometimes people who've like done this for 30 years. We need that wisdom. Like I want to call that in.
And they've done it in different environments too. They have, you know, we are in this technological age of everything being fast and speedy and so we haven't maybe built the muscle of like slowing down, listening, having to take a whole day before you get to respond to that person. We haven't grown up in that, but we have elders who have, and that was like part of the environment that they grew up in.
Yep.
And they can bring a lot of wisdom because of that and because they've had those experiences when things didn't have to be maybe as fast as they have to be now.
That's a great point. Yeah, we want to call in more elders. And if there's anyone who listens to this that wants to share, who's been in the movement for more than a couple decades, or who would like to share wisdom, like we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I hope that people who are listening to this, I really hope if you're one of those people who has wanted to say something, who has wanted to be heard, but has been afraid because of just being, you know, called out or canceled because you might say something wrong. I mean, know that there are people, and then there's people writing books about not doing that. And we want to hear your voice. I mean, we need more and more people speaking about collective liberation and feeling like they can speak without having to be absolutely perfect in how they say things.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you said that. And I really want to say that those people's involvement in this movement strengthens our ability to manage conflict. So this is part of the learning in public bit. Start before you have it all figured out. Start speaking up. Start sharing from your heart. Start getting involved. And yeah, there are a lot of us that support learning in public. There are a lot of us who are ready to engage with that as a restorative and a redemptive tool. So I'm so glad that you said that. And I would really challenge or encourage anyone to read We Will Not Cancel Us. And a lot of Adrienne Marie Brown's work is great. Emergent Strategy is great. Her vision in transformative justice is, I think, really important and critical now as it was years ago when she wrote it. And really, you know, I also want to encourage people. I know that sometimes it's hard to be that one comment on a video, but encourage compassion. Like be a voice for compassion in these spaces because it's more critical now than ever.
Very critical. It's part of learning in public. I hope more and more people start to feel, I feel like we need to just say that all the time. We're learning in public. Everyone should be learning in public. That's a good thing. Yeah, a good thing.
It is a great thing. All right. Thank you, Deema.
Thank you, Anna.